A billionaire yelled at a black waitress, expecting fear, expecting silence, expecting obedience. He thought he could humiliate her, thinking no one would dare speak back. He had money, he had influence, he had power enough to make people bow before him. But she didn't flinch. She didn't stammer. She didn't shrink. She looked him in the eye and said one sentence that froze him mid-rant. One sentence that made the entire room hold its breath. One sentence that exposed decades of arrogance, entitlement, and the invisible walls built around him by wealth. The diners stopped talking. Forks hovered mid-air. Phones recorded silently. Everyone waited, not daring to blink. He realized too late that she was not afraid of him. She was not intimidated. She was not invisible. And in that moment, the tables turned forever. The arrogant billionaire, used to control and obedience, learned the terrifying power of courage. What really happened that night would shock everyone watching, and it all began inside one of the most exclusive restaurants. Let's dive into the story. The chandelier light shimmered like liquid gold across the marble floors of Le Chien Blanc, the most exclusive restaurant in Manhattan. The room whispered with quiet luxury polished silverware, soft laughter, and the faint clinking of crystal glasses. Every movement was rehearsed perfection. The staff glided rather than walked. Among them moved Ava Johnson, 25, her black hair tied in a neat bun that framed a face far too young to carry so much fatigue. Her uniform was spotless, but her eyes told stories of double shifts and sleepless nights. Each paycheck she earned brought her 1 inch closer to nursing school. Her escape from this world where smiles were required and respect was optional. But something about tonight felt heavy, like a storm cloud was about to roll in. Ava balanced a tray in her hands when the doors swung open. A wave of silence rippled through the dining room. Every fork froze mid-air. Charles Whitmore had arrived. His entrance was almost theatrical, the door held open by a valet, his polished shoes echoing across the marble like a slow drumbeat of authority. His suit looked custom-made to intimidate. His watch alone probably cost more than Ava's yearly salary. And though it was evening, his mirrored sunglasses stayed on, reflecting back a distorted image of everyone who dared to look. Staff members straightened up, pretending not to notice him, but everyone did. They always did. Charles Whitmore didn't walk into rooms he claimed them. From behind the counter, Linda Cooper, the manager, turned sharply toward Ava. Her voice was barely a whisper, but carried the edge of warning. "Ava, table 7. That's Mr. Whitmore. Do not mess this up, okay?" Ava nodded, her heartbeat quickening. "Yes, ma'am." She smoothed her apron, inhaled deeply, and stepped into the lion's den. As she walked toward table 7, every sound seemed to stretch the faint hum of the piano, the clatter of distant dishes, even the air itself. She didn't know it yet, but this night this one table was about to change her life forever. Ava approached table 7, tray in hand, her steps measured and calm. Yet beneath that calmness, her pulse drummed like a warning. Charles Whitmore sat with 2 men in suits who looked more like bodyguards than colleagues. Their laughter was loud, the kind that made other diners glance over, uncomfortable but too polite to say anything. Charles leaned back in his chair, exuding the easy arrogance of a man who'd never once been questioned. Ava stopped beside him, offering her practiced smile. "Good evening, sir. Welcome to Le Chien Blanc. My name is Ava, and I'll be—" He cut her off without looking up from his phone. "You're late." Ava blinked, taken aback. I apologize, sir. I just wanted to—" "Excuses," he said sharply, tossing his phone onto the table. "Just bring the wine list, and make it quick." Ava hesitated for half a second, then nodded. "Of course, sir." As she turned to leave, one of the men at the table smirked. "Don't spill it this time, sweetheart," he muttered under his breath, loud enough for her to hear. Ava felt heat rise to her face but said nothing. Years in customer service had taught her how to swallow humiliation like water. So, when she returned with the wine list, she set it down gently. Charles finally looked up, his gaze sweeping over her. slow and cold. "Tell me, Ava," he said, drawing out her name. "How long have you been serving?" The pause after the word serving carried more venom than the word itself. "About 2 years, sir," she replied quietly. He leaned forward, a smirk playing at his lips. 2 years. Must be tough work. Long hours, low pay. But hey, better than nothing, right? His companions laughed. Ava's jaw tightened. She forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "It's honest work, sir." Sure, Charles replied, waving his hand as if brushing off a fly. "I just find it fascinating. People like you always smiling, always hustling. You must be grateful. Back in my father's day, people like you didn't even get jobs like this." The laughter stopped. Even his own men shifted awkwardly. Ava froze, her heart pounding in her chest. She felt her throat close, but she didn't speak. She couldn't. For a moment she wondered if anyone had heard it. The nearby table certainly had. A man in a navy suit looked down at his plate. A woman sipped her wine too quickly. Pretending not to hear was easier than standing up. Ava inhaled deeply, nodded once and turned to walk away, her spine straight, her eyes glistening. Behind her, Charles chuckled softly. "Ah, sensitive. Guess I hit a nerve." But what he didn't realize was that Ava had already decided she would not let this man walk away, thinking she was beneath him. Something inside her had shifted. Ava walked briskly toward the service counter, keeping her head down, but her hands trembled as she reached for a tray. She tried to steady her breathing. "Keep it together," she told herself. "Don't let him win." The hum of the kitchen felt miles away, muffled beneath the weight of the restaurant's silence. Her co-workers avoided her eyes. They had seen what happened, and they didn't want to get involved. From behind the espresso machine, Linda Cooper, her manager, leaned closer. Her voice was low, clipped. "Ava, I know that was rough, but please don't make a scene. He's an important client." Ava blinked, barely believing what she'd heard. "A scene? He just humiliated me in front of everyone." Linda sighed, glancing nervously toward table 7. "I know, but we can't afford to lose him. Just do your job and let it go. Smile through it, okay?" That sentence, "smile through it," hit harder than Charles's words. Ava stared at her reflection in the metal counter, her eyes shining, her expression hollow. She'd spent her whole life being told to smile through it, through unfairness, through prejudice, through pain. She took another deep breath, straightened her uniform, and forced the corners of her lips upward. The mask was back. Out on the floor, Charles was laughing again. The sound of it crawled beneath her skin. Every few seconds, she heard his voice louder than anyone else's, confident, cruel, as if mocking the world itself. At a table in the far corner sat an elderly woman, Margaret Whitmore alone, quiet and seemingly invisible to everyone. Her silver hair gleamed softly under the chandelier, and her calm eyes followed the scene with growing concern. She noticed everything, the arrogance, the fear, the silence that hung over the staff like fog. When Ava walked past her, Margaret's gaze lingered. There was something in it, empathy, recognition, sorrow, something Ava couldn't quite place. At table 7, Charles raised his voice again. "Hey, waitress!" Ava froze mid-step, tray still in her hands. Every eye turned toward her. "We've been waiting on our order for 10 minutes, he barked. "Is that too complicated for you? Or is it just hard to keep up with the job?" His tone was mocking, dripping with disdain. The men at his table exchanged awkward glances. Ava stepped forward, her voice steady but quiet. "I'll check with the kitchen right away, sir." "You do that," Charles said, leaning back smirking. "I'd hate to think they're giving out charity positions now." The restaurant went utterly still. Even the soft piano stopped. Ava stood there, eyes locked on him, the faintest tremor in her hand, the reflection of every insult she'd ever swallowed flickering across her face. And then, she nodded once, turned, and walked away with quiet grace. But this time she wasn't just walking off to hide. She was walking off to decide whether to keep bowing to men like him or finally make them see her worth. Dinner service rolled on, but the mood inside Le Chien Blanc had shifted. Conversations dimmed to whispers. The tension around table 7 hung thick and uncomfortable. Ava approached again, carefully placing the plates before Charles and his guests. She kept her face neutral, her hands steady, her voice calm, but inside she was trembling. "Your filet mignon, sir," she said softly. Charles didn't even glance at the plate. "Finally," he muttered. "Took long enough." His voice carried across the room. People looked down again, pretending to be fascinated by their food, by their napkins, by anything except what was happening. As Ava began to serve the others, Charles leaned back, swirling his wine glass lazily. "Tell me something, Ava," he said suddenly, loud enough for half the restaurant to hear. "Do you enjoy this kind of work, serving people like me?" Ava hesitated. I'm just doing my job, sir." He smirked. "Doing your job? Right. You see, that's what separates people like you from people like me. I built companies, created jobs. You just deliver food. Different worlds." The words landed like stones. His companions laughed again, though one of them, a younger man, stopped halfway, the guilt visible in his eyes. Ava straightened, swallowing hard. "Everyone's work matters, sir," she said quietly. Charles chuckled, not kindly, but with mockery. "Oh, come on. Don't get philosophical on me. You think we're equal because you brought a steak to my table? Don't embarrass yourself." He took a sip of his wine, savoring his own cruelty. Ava didn't reply. She stepped back, standing silently, her breath slow and deliberate. The humiliation burned inside her, but so did something else, something colder, stronger. Across the room, Margaret watched her fingers tight around her glass. She recognized that tone, that superiority, that same voice her husband had once used to destroy people's dignity. Ava turned to leave, but Charles wasn't done. He leaned forward, his voice sharp. "Hey, when I talk to you, don't walk away." Ava stopped, the tray in her hand tilted, slightly trembling. "You know what your problem is?" Charles said, his voice rising. "You people don't know your place anymore. You think smiling and saying sir makes you one of us." The silence that followed was deafening. Someone gasped. A spoon clinked against a plate. Ava froze. Her mind screamed. Her heart pounded so hard it echoed in her ears. And yet, she didn't cry. She didn't shout. She simply looked at him, really looked for the first time. Her eyes no longer carried fear, only quiet strength. Charles smirked again, mistaking her calm for weakness. "That's what I thought," he said smugly. "Now run along before I ask for someone who knows how to do their job." Ava turned slightly, not to leave this time, but to face him directly. "Is that all, sir?" she asked, her voice even, but razor sharp beneath the calm. Charles blinked, momentarily thrown off. "Excuse me?" "I said," she repeated slowly, "is that all?" The question hung in the air, not as service etiquette, but as defiance. For a split second, no one moved. Then something flickered in his expression, the faintest trace of doubt. He looked around and realized the entire restaurant was watching. Like stones on marble, heavy, cold, and echoing far longer than they should. Charles took another sip of his wine, clearly pleased with himself. To him, this wasn't cruelty. It was sport. Ava's hands were steady now. Something inside her had gone still, that kind of stillness that comes just before a storm. She glanced around the room. Every face had turned away again. The same look, polite discomfort, silent fear. No one would speak for her. She inhaled slowly, let it burn through her chest, and then finally set the tray down. Her voice was calm, almost soft. "You said people like you create jobs, Mr. Whitmore." He looked up smug. "That's right. Then maybe you should meet one of the people who made your life possible." Charles frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" The restaurant held its breath. Ava took a single step closer, her eyes locked on his. "My mother used to work in your house cleaning your father's floors." The words dropped like thunder in a silent sky. Charles froze, his expression shifting first confusion, then disbelief. What did you just say? You heard me, Ava replied, her tone unwavering. She was your maid, until the day your father fired her because she asked for fair pay. She came home in tears that night, said she'd never been spoken to like that in her life. The sound of her voice, low, firm, trembling with both pain and power, filled the room. She told me something I'll never forget, Ava continued. She said, one day, baby, you'll stand in front of people who think they're better than you, and you'll make them see you. A soft gasp rippled through the restaurant. Charles opened his mouth, but no sound came out. His fingers tightened around the stem of his glass. Ava leaned slightly forward. So no, sir, I'm not grateful to be here serving you. I'm proud to be standing here earning every dollar with dignity. Can you say the same about your money? Silence. Complete, bone-deep silence. Even the piano player stopped mid-note. The sound of a single glass clinking echoed like a gunshot. Every pair of eyes was on them now, not with pity, but awe. Charles's face went pale. His lips parted, but words refused to form. For the first time, the man who controlled everything couldn't control the room. Ava didn't smirk. She didn't gloat. She simply stepped back, lifted her tray, and walked away the quietest, strongest exit anyone had ever seen. And in that silence, something incredible happened. A few customers began to clap. Softly at first, then louder, until the sound filled every corner of Le Chien Blanc. The clapping started softly, just one pair of hands from a table near the window. Then another, until the entire restaurant was filled with applause that rolled like a tide, loud, genuine, and unstoppable. Charles sat motionless, staring straight ahead. His fingers still rested around the stem of his glass, but it now trembled faintly. For the first time in his adult life, he wasn't the center of admiration. He was the subject of judgment. The applause wasn't for him. It was for her. Ava Johnson, the waitress he thought was beneath him, had just silenced an empire built on arrogance. From the corner, Margaret Whitmore finally lowered her book. Her eyes glistened. She didn't clap, but her lips pressed into a faint, proud smile. To her, the young woman's words had struck something far deeper than public embarrassment. They had cracked a lifetime of denial. Ava stopped near the service counter, uncertain whether she'd just ruined her career or reclaimed her dignity. Her heart still pounded, but the weight on her chest was gone. For once, she could breathe freely. Linda Cooper hurried toward her, eyes wide, whispering urgently, Ava, oh my God, what did you just do? Ava met her gaze calmly. I told the truth. Linda looked over her shoulder at Charles, pale, silent, staring down at his untouched meal. He's one of our biggest clients. You'll lose your job over this. Then I'll lose it, Ava said quietly, but at least I won't lose myself. Linda didn't respond. For a moment, even she seemed ashamed. Across the room, Charles pushed back his chair abruptly. The sound of it scraping the floor shattered the applause. Every head turned toward him again, his jaw clenched tight, his voice low and trembling not from power, but from humiliation. This is absurd, he hissed. She should be fired immediately. The restaurant owner, who had just stepped in after hearing the commotion, raised an eyebrow. For what, Mr. Whitmore? Charles turned to him, shocked that anyone dared question him. For disrespect, for... The owner cut him off gently. For speaking the truth? That single line, calm, direct, left Charles speechless. He looked around, searching for someone to side with him, but found only silence and eyes filled with quiet disapproval. And then came a voice from the back, steady, elegant, unmistakably familiar. Sit down, Charles. The crowd turned. Margaret Whitmore was standing now, her cane tapping softly against the floor as she made her way toward him. The color drained from Charles's face. Mother! Her gaze was firm, colder than he'd ever seen. You've shamed yourself enough for one night. The restaurant was utterly still once again. Ava stood frozen, unsure what to do. Margaret stopped beside her son's table, her eyes shifting briefly toward Ava, a silent acknowledgement, one that said, "Thank you." Charles's voice cracked slightly as he spoke. "You knew her?" Margaret's reply came softly, but every word cut through the room like a blade. "I knew her mother. She was a good woman, kinder than anyone in this room, and we both know how your father treated her." Gasps rippled through the diners. Charles swallowed hard. His mask of confidence had completely fallen away. Margaret turned to Ava. "You have more grace in your silence than most men do in their power." Ava blinked, stunned, unsure how to respond. "Thank you, ma'am," she whispered. Margaret nodded once, then looked back at her son. "You were given everything, Charles, but somewhere along the way, you forgot what it means to deserve it." And with that, she turned and walked toward the door, her head high, her dignity shining brighter than any diamond in that room. Charles sat there speechless. The man who owned half the city couldn't buy his way out of that silence. Ava stood still for a long time, watching Margaret disappear into the night. She didn't know it yet, but the story of this night, her voice, her courage would spread far beyond those walls before morning. By the next morning, the story had already found its wings. A diner seated near the bar, a young journalism student had recorded the entire confrontation on his phone. What started as a few seconds of quiet filming, just in case, turned into a 4-minute video that spread like wildfire overnight. The clip was simple, no filters, no captions, just a trembling voice of a waitress standing her ground against one of the most powerful businessmen in the city. "We may serve your table, Mr. Whitmore," Ava said on screen, her voice steady. "But that doesn't make us invisible." That line hit the internet like a lightning strike. Within hours, the video racked up millions of views. Comments poured in by the thousands, some praising her bravery, others expressing disbelief that such arrogance still existed. #justice for Ava. #stand for respect. #not invisible. Hashtags began trending across platforms. News outlets picked it up next. Waitress stands up to billionaire in viral confrontation. Morning shows replayed the footage, analyzing every frame, her composure, his expression, and that quiet applause that followed. At the restaurant, phones wouldn't stop ringing. Some calls were from reporters, others were from regular customers, people who said they just wanted to meet the woman who spoke for all of us. Ava hadn't gone online yet. She had woken up late, still exhausted and unsure if she'd even have a job to return to. When she stepped outside, her neighbor, Mrs. Donnelly, who usually just waved from across the hall, was waiting with a newspaper in hand. "Sweetheart," she said, eyes wide with pride, "you're on the front page." Ava froze. "What?" Mrs. Donnelly smiled, turning the paper toward her. There it was, a still image of Ava, standing firm with her apron on, chin raised, and eyes full of quiet defiance. The headline read, "One woman's words silenced a billionaire." Ava stared at it for a long moment. Her hands trembled. She wasn't sure whether to laugh or cry. Across town, inside the sleek glass headquarters of Whitmore Holdings, a storm was brewing. Charles sat in his office, blinds drawn, as publicists scrambled around him. Screens on the walls replayed the viral clip again and again. His face, the face of authority and control, now symbolized arrogance and entitlement. A PR consultant leaned forward nervously. "Sir, this is everywhere. We need a statement." Charles's jaw tightened. "Then write one, something professional." She took it out of context. The consultant hesitated. "Sir, it wasn't out of context. Everyone saw the whole thing." Charles slammed his palm on the desk. "Then fix it." But there was no fixing this. The internet had already chosen its truth. Meanwhile, in a modest apartment miles away, Ava sat on her couch, her phone buzzing nonstop messages from coworkers, strangers, even reporters asking for interviews. She didn't answer any of them. Instead, she just looked out her window at the city skyline and whispered softly to herself, "All I wanted was a little respect." She didn't know it yet, but this was only the beginning. By mid-morning, Charles Whitmore's carefully curated world of influence and dominance began to feel alarmingly fragile. His office, once a sanctuary of authority, now hummed with tension. Screens flickered endlessly with headlines, news clips, and social media reactions. Every video replayed his arrogance, every frame a reminder of how a single act of courage could challenge centuries of entitlement. Public outrage wasn't subtle. Tweets called him out by name. Editorials dissected his behavior. Even high-powered investors began sending cautious messages, worried that a tarnished reputation could damage their own holdings. One board member even suggested a temporary leave from public appearances a humiliation in itself. Inside his office, Charles paced, suit jacket unbuttoned, tie loosened. For someone used to commanding the room with a glance, this was unfamiliar territory. "This is absurd," he muttered, voice tight. "It's just a waitress. She doesn't even know who she's talking to." His assistant handed him a tablet filled with screenshots, tweets, and hundreds of emails. Charles scrolled, growing paler with each new alert. "Cancel my meetings," he snapped. "Everything. I want this under control." But control was slipping like sand through his fingers. Meanwhile, Margaret Whitmore, the quiet observer at the restaurant, had been watching from afar. News of the viral confrontation had reached her by noon. She sat in her study, her hands folded, watching Charles squirm through every live news segment. She didn't call him, she didn't lecture him. She simply observed, letting the consequences of his own arrogance unfold. Margaret had seen it before, the way privilege could blind a person to their own cruelty. And now, she thought quietly, the universe was offering a rare chance for accountability. Back at the restaurant, staff whispered about Ava's courage. Tips poured in from new customers wanting to support the waitress who had dared to speak the truth. Co-workers who had once been silent bystanders began to stand a little taller, inspired by her defiance. Charles's PR team worked frantically, crafting statements and apologies. But nothing seemed to quell the storm. Every press release was met with criticism, every attempted excuse twisted back into proof of his arrogance. In the Whitmore Holdings boardroom, a meeting convened. Top executives debated damage control. One younger executive finally voiced the thought that lingered in everyone's minds. "Sir, perhaps this is a chance to reflect." Charles's face darkened. "Reflect?" he barked. "I don't reflect. I manage. I control. I succeed." But no amount of success could erase the image of a young black woman standing up to him, calm, dignified, unshakable. By evening, Ava's name was trending across the country. Every local news outlet, every social media platform, every talk show discussed her courage. And with each mention, Charles's empire of intimidation seemed just a little more brittle. Margaret Whitmore, finally picking up her phone, sent a short, private message to Ava. "You have done what most of us only dream of. You made power reckon with conscience." Ava stared at the message, her chest tight with disbelief and relief. It was the first recognition that someone who truly understood the stakes was on her side. And somewhere deep inside, she knew the confrontation hadn't just been about standing up to one arrogant man. It had been about showing the world that dignity, courage, and truth could shake even the tallest towers of privilege. By the following week, Ava Johnson was no longer just a waitress at Le Chien Blanc. She had become a symbol, a quiet, unyielding force against arrogance and racial injustice. News programs replayed the video countless times. Social media amplified her words. "We may serve your table, but that doesn't make us invisible." Every share, every retweet, every comment added weight to her defiance. She was trending not just in New York, but across the country. Her phone rang constantly. Journalists, podcast hosts, even advocacy groups wanted interviews. But Ava handled it carefully. She didn't seek fame. She sought change. She wanted to make sure her story highlighted dignity, not revenge. At the restaurant, coworkers watched in awe. Some who had once avoided confrontation were now inspired to speak up when they witnessed injustice. The staff began to hold themselves with more pride, treating every customer, even difficult ones, with a renewed sense of self-respect. Ava's courage had created a ripple effect. Margaret Whitmore continued to support her quietly, a private mentor in the shadows, She offered wisdom without intrusion. Her earlier message, "You made power reckon with conscience," became Ava's guiding thought. Meanwhile, Charles Whitmore's empire struggled to regain its footing. His arrogance was now part of the public record, his reputation tarnished. Clients reconsidered partnerships, and the once feared billionaire found himself publicly scrutinized and privately isolated. Yet the most remarkable transformation was in Ava herself. She had started receiving invitations to speak at schools, universities, and leadership conferences. Companies reached out to hear her insights on courage and dignity. She realized that one moment of bravery could be leveraged to empower others. But it wasn't just recognition, it was responsibility. Ava began to mentor young workers facing discrimination, sharing her experience and strategies for standing firm with integrity. Each story she heard, each life she touched, reinforced the truth she had discovered. Standing up for yourself could inspire thousands more to do the same. Her life wasn't perfect. She faced criticism from some corners, those loyal to privilege, threatened by change. But Ava had learned to separate fear from purpose. She knew that every powerful voice that tried to silence her only confirmed the importance of speaking out. Months later, Ava stood on a small stage at a local community event, addressing a crowd of young professionals and students. She recounted the night at Le Chien Blanc, not with anger, but with clarity. It wasn't about winning or losing. It was about showing that dignity is stronger than wealth, and courage is louder than fear. The crowd erupted in applause. Some of them had watched her viral moment countless times. Others were hearing it for the first time. Yet each person left inspired, carrying the lesson forward. For Ava, the restaurant had been the spark, but the fire now roared across the country. And she knew one thing: this was only the beginning. Her courage had not just frozen a billionaire and captivated a restaurant, it had started a movement. Ava's life had changed, but the questions that lingered in the back of her mind had not. Why had Margaret Whitmore looked at her with that quiet understanding in the restaurant? Why had she seemed to know? Meanwhile, Charles Whitmore had retreated into his penthouse, his once perfect world crumbling under public scrutiny. He ignored phone calls, avoided the media, and even his closest advisors began whispering doubts about his judgment. But he could not ignore Margaret's voice. Her calm but firm reprimand had pierced deeper than the viral video ever could. Margaret, back in her elegant brownstone, stared at a worn photograph of a young black woman. The woman in the photo smiled softly, her eyes full of determination and grace. Margaret traced the edges of the frame with her finger, her lips moving silently. She remembered that day vividly, the day she had met Ava's mother, cleaning the Whitmore estate floors as part of a job she'd been forced into. Margaret had admired her strength and the way she refused to bow to cruelty, even from a young, entitled Charles Whitmore. She had seen potential in that family line, a spark of courage, but it had been buried under years of privilege and arrogance. Margaret had watched Charles grow into a man who believed power was everything and empathy nothing. And now, years later, that same courage had resurfaced in Ava, the daughter of the woman Margaret had once quietly mentored and defended. She knew it wasn't coincidence. Ava had inherited not just her mother's resilience, but also the ability to speak truth in the face of fear. Margaret smiled faintly, feeling pride she hadn't experienced in decades. Far away, Charles remained oblivious to the deeper connections at play. His fury had consumed him, but he could not escape the shadow of his own family's past. The mistakes of his father, the injustices done to those who had served his family, and the power he had misused all were threads that now intertwined with Ava's courage, creating a reckoning he couldn't control. And Margaret, quietly watching the story unfold, realized that sometimes the strongest lessons travel across generations, waiting for the right person to hear them, the right moment to act. Charles Whitmore paced his penthouse, the weight of public scrutiny pressing down harder than any boardroom pressure he had ever faced. The viral video had left him exposed, but it was Margaret's words, calm, unwavering, that gnawed at him the most. "You've shamed yourself enough for one night," she had said in the restaurant. Those words echoed in his mind, refusing to fade. Margaret had requested a private meeting, something she had never done before. For once, she wasn't guiding silently from the sidelines. She wanted to confront her son directly, and this confrontation would not be about public perception. It would be about truth. "Charles," she said firmly, as he finally faced her in the study, "you need to understand the history you are ignoring." Charles's jaw tightened. "I don't need a lecture, Mother. I understand business, power, and legacy." "No, you don't understand," Margaret replied. "You've grown up believing that privilege excuses cruelty. You've seen people like Ava's mother dismissed and disrespected, and you've done nothing." Charles swallowed, struggling to maintain composure. "I didn't know the details. That was a long time ago." "Long ago or not, the consequences echo," Margaret said. Her voice softened, almost sorrowful. "You may have forgotten, but I have not. And now someone has the courage to speak truth to you. Someone your father would have ignored. Someone with the grace and dignity you lack." Charles looked away, guilt and anger mixing in a storm behind his eyes. He finally asked, voice low, "You mean Ava?" "Yes," Margaret said. "Ava. She stands for everything you have tried to suppress: integrity, respect, courage. She is your reckoning." The words hung heavy in the air. Charles's arrogance, once impenetrable, wavered. He realized the depth of the generational consequences of his family's actions, and that this young woman had unearthed truths he had never faced. I didn't mean to," he began, but Margaret interrupted. "Intent doesn't erase impact, Charles, and humility doesn't come from wealth or power. It comes from recognizing the humanity you've overlooked, the humanity that Ava embodies." Silence filled the room, dense and uncomfortable. For the first time, Charles felt exposed not to the public, but to the truth of his own upbringing and the actions of his father. Margaret's eyes softened as she added quietly, "You can choose to make amends, or you can continue this path of arrogance. But know this: Ava's courage has shown what true power looks like, and it isn't in wealth, it's in conscience." Charles sank into a chair, the enormity of her words pressing down on him. The confrontation was not just about the past, it was about the man he had become and the legacy he wanted to leave behind. Outside, Ava was unaware of this private reckoning, but in that moment, the foundation of the Whitmore legacy, built on entitlement, arrogance, and silence, began to crack. The morning after the family confrontation, Charles Whitmore felt an unfamiliar weight pressing down on him. The viral video, the public backlash, and now his mother's sharp, unwavering words combined to form a reckoning he could no longer avoid. For decades, Charles had relied on wealth, influence, and fear to shield himself. But Ava Johnson had exposed cracks that no money could repair. He sat in his office, scrolling through endless news reports, interviews with Ava, editorials analyzing the moral failings of the privileged, social media campaigns supporting her, and opinion pieces calling for corporate accountability. Every headline carried the same message: dignity and courage outweigh wealth and entitlement. The Whitmore board called an emergency meeting. Charles entered the room, tense and quieter than usual. His once commanding presence had diminished. Executives, accustomed to his arrogance, exchanged wary glances. "We have to act quickly," said a senior advisor. "This isn't just a PR problem. Public trust in the Whitmore brand is collapsing." Charles ran a hand through his hair, realizing the truth he had long avoided. "What can we do?" he muttered, voice lower than usual. "Apologize publicly and take meaningful steps," the advisor replied. "You need to acknowledge the wrongs, not just smooth them over." For the first time, Charles understood words alone weren't enough. His empire of fear couldn't buy redemption. Meanwhile, Ava's influence was spreading. Organizations advocating for workplace equality invited her to speak. Community leaders sought her advice on empowering employees to stand up against discrimination. News outlets continued to cover her story, highlighting the broader implications of her courage. Margaret Whitmore reached out privately, offering guidance. "Remember, Ava, your strength isn't just for you. It's for every person who has ever been silenced. Use it wisely." Ava realized her voice was more than a single defiant moment, it was a catalyst. People were listening, learning, and acting. She began organizing workshops, speaking events, and mentorship sessions, using her experience as a blueprint for courage and dignity. Back at Whitmore Holdings, Charles drafted his first public apology, long overdue and carefully worded. He acknowledged not only his behavior, but also the historical wrongs perpetuated by his family. It was a start, but he knew he had a long road ahead. Public perception was hard to repair, and many were skeptical of his motives. The contrast between the two figures, Ava, rising through courage and integrity, and Charles, grappling with the weight of his own privilege, became a story in itself. News outlets highlighted the irony, a billionaire humbled by the quiet strength of a young waitress. Ava, however, remained grounded. She didn't seek fame, she sought justice, recognition of dignity, and systemic change. Her story became a beacon for others, proving that one voice, when unwavering, could challenge even the most powerful. And in every speech, every interview, every interaction, Ava remembered the night at Le Chien Blanc. She remembered the fear, the trembling hands, the forced smiles. But she also remembered the power of truth and courage, and how one simple sentence had frozen an entire restaurant, altered a billionaire, and inspired a nation. Weeks had passed since the confrontation that would become one of the most talked about moments in modern workplace history. Le Chien Blanc had returned to a semblance of normalcy, but the air inside the restaurant had changed forever. Ava Johnson moved with quiet confidence. The once timid waitress who had swallowed humiliation like water now commanded respect without saying a word. Patrons greeted her warmly, and colleagues looked at her with admiration and a newfound sense of pride. Every shift reminded her of the night that had shifted the balance of power. Her small acts taking orders, serving meals now carried weight beyond the restaurant walls. She was no longer just a server. She was a symbol of resilience, dignity, and justice. The city outside reflected her change as well. Social media continued to buzz with stories of people inspired by Ava. Students quoted her line, activists referenced her courage, and ordinary workers shared how her defiance gave them strength to speak up in their own workplaces. Meanwhile, Charles Whitmore remained in the public eye for all the wrong reasons. Apologies and statements did little to rebuild the trust he had shattered. His board of directors pressured him to take action, yet the shadow of Ava's defiance lingered over every decision. His empire still stood, but its foundation was forever shaken. And somewhere in between, Margaret Whitmore watched quietly. She knew the past could not be erased, but she also knew that Ava had become a force capable of shaping a better future, one where courage and integrity mattered more than inherited wealth. Months later, Ava Johnson had become more than a viral moment. She had become a movement. Schools, corporations, and community organizations invited her to speak. Her message was simple but powerful. Dignity and courage are stronger than fear and wealth. Le Chien Blanc thrived, not just for its cuisine, but for the story that had unfolded within its walls. Staff morale soared, inspired by Ava's bravery. New employees were reminded that respect was non-negotiable, and that silence in the face of injustice was no longer acceptable. Charles Whitmore, humbled and isolated, had begun a slow, reluctant journey toward accountability. Publicly, he remained a figure of wealth, but privately he confronted the arrogance and entitlement that had defined him. Margaret Whitmore's quiet guidance helped him see the generational lessons he had ignored. For Ava, the recognition mattered little compared to the change she was helping create. Her courage had frozen a billionaire, inspired thousands, and reminded the world that one voice, calm, unwavering, and just, could topple arrogance and spark lasting change. And in the quiet moments when she reflected on that night at Le Chien Blanc, Ava smiled softly. A single sentence had changed everything, not just for her, but for everyone who had ever been made to feel invisible. Her legacy was clear. Courage has power, dignity has weight, and justice can start with a single voice.